So thank you for being here, right? So for folks who don't know, right, Ginger Grant is so our friend and MVP, the doer of data things. She has been, I mean, so you can just look at her background, right, and get a sense for the, so I have to fill with Disney stuff, right? She's got, look at my accomplishments, books and, certificates and, if maybe you've seen her courses at Data Camp or, whatnot. So we're excited to have you here. She does hail from Arizona, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about how organizations can manage some of their Excel and some of their flat file data, right, Ginger?
Yeah, I'm going to be basically talking about, what people are talking about when they're talking about data warehousing, tell you about the traditional methods, and then start to thinking about things that you may not have thought before. And that gets into all the stuff with flat files, because data warehousing is not just throw everything in a database anymore. That's a great solution depending upon what you've got going on in your organization. But there's a lot more than that. And we'll look at the flat file aspect. And this is really a introductory session, not meant to be terribly technical. And then next session, we're going to get into the how-tos, taking a look at how you can take flat files and Excel, including Excel files, and use those to create a virtual database.
Yeah, so this I think is going to be exciting, right? So again, for this session, we do want to focus a little bit higher level, right? Kind of show the vision, of what's possible. I think, perhaps we've all been engaged with some type of data warehouse project, and maybe you are terrified of it. Maybe that's scary to you. And we thought, hey, there are some other options available to you here. And we thought we'd present on those. So with that, thank you, Ginger.
You're welcome. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Like I said, we're going to be talking about different cloud-based data warehousing and data lake solutions. And I'll start with the expensive stuff and get to the cheap stuff. I already got an intro, so I'll just kind of blow on through this slide with the exception of if you have any questions after this and you want to follow up with me later on Twitter, works really well at DesertIsleSQL, or you can send me an email at gingergrant@desertisleSQL.com. All right, so cloud-based data warehousing. So cloud-based data warehousing can be a lot of different things to different people. A lot of times now it starts with what I like to call an operational data store. Let's face it, everybody's got some data that they would like to hold on to, like to query, like to analyze, or think they don't have time to do it now and would like to do it later. And we're going to talk about, different things that you might want to investigate. And let's face it too, if you are running, say, a call center, or you have a lot of PDFs, or maybe you're in a kind of a business like an insurance company that I talk to, where people send them a whole bunch of pictures they take on their cell phones of their accidents and forms and stuff like that. And you want to save that stuff off. Where do you put that, and how can you access that? And can you incorporate that as part of your data solution? And the answer, of course, is yes. And we'll talk about different ways to do that. And I'm going to start with the traditional methods I'm sure you're familiar with. And then we'll go into things that you may not be familiar with. And as a bonus, it costs a lot less as well. So with that, let's talk about straight up data warehousing. And which solution is best of the ones that I have on the slide: the dedicated pools, Azure SQL DB, data lake houses, or virtual SQL databases? Well, it depends. And that's a classic consulting environment. But what I want to do is provide you with different options. And then you can say, well, in my environment, this makes the most sense, and just kind of cover the gamut so that you can see what all of options are possibly available to you. So the first one is the new Azure Data Warehousing, since I'm only discussing cloud-based solutions today. And that is the dedicated pool within Azure Synapse Analytics. And this is designed for really big data. What do I mean by really big data? We're talking about a terabyte or more. So if you don't have a terabyte, then this probably isn't a good solution for you. It uses mostly standard SQL. I say mostly because I had to do some work with it recently, and I found out that it does not. It doesn't handle some things that I wish it would, because it doesn't have all of the DMVs. So it's close, but there's a couple things that it doesn't have. And it integrates with most tools. So I know that there's really no point in creating any kind of data store if you can't get the data out of it. So yes, of course, you can use it to connect to various reporting tools, Tableau, Power BI, and SSRS, which is now called the new paginated report, which is really the same thing. So that's the kind of things that you can do with a dedicated pool. So I'll just show you a quick dedicated data warehouse to just show you what all that looks like. Oops, and I just got tossed out of it. So let me show it to you. It really looks like any other database, with a difference in that the tables look a little bit different. So here I've got oops, that's Power BI. Here I've got just a standard version of SQL Server Management Studio. And the way that you can tell that this is running on a dedicated pool is, let's zoom, it's not working right now, is that you see that I've got these tables that have the funny icons next to them. And those funny icons just mean that what it does is it has different data stores. So this is designed to be massively parallel in the way that the data gets loaded. And as a result, I'll blow this up here a little bit and see how these icons are all different. These just show the different ways in which the data is stored, so that you can take advantage of all the different capabilities to be able to make that work efficiently. So it's pretty much what you would expect if you're talking about your standard SQL database. So the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, solution-wise, is this the right solution for you? Now, remember I said that this is designed for a terabyte or greater. So that means that if you don't have that kind of data, then it's probably not a good solution for you. It does contain a lot of really interesting elements. It's blazingly fast from a query perspective. And you can also use it to prioritize workloads. So if you want your reporting to always be fast, you can assign priorities so that those particular queries will be done quickly, and you can set hours and different priorities. A lot of really great things that you can accomplish with it. But you are charged for every minute that it is in operation. So like a minimum cost per month would probably something close to $4,000. It's that's one of the smaller sizes, and it goes up from there. So it also requires quite a bit of tuning knowledge specific to how you would operate a dedicated pool. So keep that in mind if you choose to use that as a solution. You can use it, but those are the reasons that you might decide there's other options that would suit you better. Azure SQL DB. This is SQL Server in the cloud. It's available in a number of different sizes. And of course, you can use it for ad hoc and reporting tools. Again, with creating a data warehouse, the big thing is making sure that your data joins together. And you can definitely do that and load your data into Azure SQL DB. Is this the right solution for you? Well, it has minimal amounts of upskilling required. I assume many of you are already using SQL Server databases. And in that instance, there's not a whole lot of difference with the way that it performs. But if you're going to be talking about that terabyte of data, then you may have performance issues for larger databases. So it may not be the right solution for you. Let's start talking about some of the more exotic solutions. And that would be something like a data lakehouse. Now, a data lakehouse is when you start having your operational data loaded to a giant file server in the sky, a data lake. And the important thing to remember with your data lake is you need to make sure that it is formatted really well so that you can find things. So with a lot of companies now, I see them putting a large majority of their data. It can be image data, it can be sound, it can be video, in addition to things like, standard text. As long as you know how to find it, hey, you're in great shape. It just means that you need to have a pretty good organization of folders. Now, to use it as if it was a database, you're going to need to organize things as if it was a table. So even if you do have images, you need to tag those internally so that they can be found. And again, this is putting your data into a storage location that is similar to a giant file server. Think of it as SharePoint in the sky. So you can use that as your location for storing all sorts of files. For example, let's say that you are working with a third-party provider and they give you your data as an Excel file. And you want to make that data available to everybody within your organization. Maybe not everybody. Maybe you want to limit it to certain people. If you choose to store that in the data lake, what you can do is not only can you keep different versions for every time that you get a new file. Let's say that you get a file monthly, but it contains the year-to-date data. That's okay. Just put it in a different folder. You'll be fine with that. And you can also prevent people from ever modifying it by putting read-write restrictions on the folder that it's currently in, ensuring that nobody will be able to touch your source data, which is always a good thing. At that point, what you can then do is you can create ETL to format it. Let's say that you get 3 or 4 Excel files, and you want to look at those together. You can create different ETL jobs that will allow you to put the data into one place so that you can look at all of your data at one time. And this can be, really helpful for, running different things within Excel, because you can use this as a data source. So let's take a look at how that would work and how you can use that, of course, within Power BI as well, just kind of as a back end. So here I've got a bunch of data, and I'm showing you this in the Azure Storage Explorer. And what I've done is I have uploaded my Excel files here to my data lake. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. If you're just talking really small files and you want to do this yourself, let's say somebody emails them to you on a ad hoc basis and you just want to handle that. All you need to do is basically use this interface to say upload and download a file to a given location. Now, if you are getting lots of files, you're getting them periodically, I highly recommend a more automated service to do that. But hey, if you are in a bind and you need to move something that's not that big, you can go ahead and use this Microsoft Azure Explorer tool to move the data in yourself. It doesn't handle very large files, though. Keep that in mind. But once I've, say, loaded my Excel files here, let me go ahead and open those two. Just some Excel files I have for like households and sessions that then I can just go ahead and put those wherever I need them to be. Here I've had said that this is data that is in my raw folder, and this is from my services third-party provider. So that's where I have added these 2 Excel files. Well, let's take a look at that from an Azure perspective and see how that looks and how I can use that. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Azure. So And I've got all of the data that I have shown you here. This is I've got a number of different containers here. This is in my Synapse 11 data lake container. It's listed under Blob Containers. So let's go ahead and look at that from within Azure. So here is my data lake. And we can see here that I can use a browser to look at my blob containers. And my highest level is root because I had to give it a name. So I chose to call it that. And here in my raw data, I've got a number of different elements here, including, of course, my I've got CSV files here. And where did I have this? This is in my services folder. So I can take a look at these Excel files and see about using those in a different format. Now, if I want,
you'll forgive me, Ginger, just for bumping in. So for those who may be watching, right? So while we are showing this through the Azure, kind of components, don't get too hung up on that right now, right? Just so you could think of this now. While there is a step, just think of this. This is your network share, and you've got Excel documents that are out there, right? And now we're looking at it through a slightly different lens, if you will. But you can kind of consider it that way, and that might be slightly more approachable, particularly for those who aren't as familiar with the Azure components. Is that
so it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't really matter where you have them to start with, because what we can do is, like I said, you can use this tool, which is the Storage Explorer, to load them straight up into Azure, or we could write a job to pull the data from wherever you happen to have it locally. So it just needs to get here first. And there's a number of different ways of making that happen.
Right.
So
awesome.
Thank you. Is that helpful?
It is to me, right? And so if others have questions or feel like they need to, help connecting those dots, right? Let us know.
Sure. Yeah, because it doesn't matter. Because if you have your data like on your machine, I could create a job to extract that data and then pull it off at a scheduled time and load it to here. Now, once it's here, I've got some options into things that I might want to do with this. So if you see here under raw, I've got a lot of different data that I have stored up here. I might want to join different data elements together. I probably don't want to play around with this data too much, as in I don't want to modify it, because this is, how somebody gave it to me. This could be my source data from my source system. What I probably want to do is, if I want to modify it so that I can use it in a Power BI report, which is designed to use files, what I can do then is I can move it from this. I can do some transformations in a different data tool, and then put a copy of it into this curated section. So in this curated section, I've gone through and I've matched my data elements to different components. And so I've done something so that I can use to create a data model. So what I end up with is something like a list of customers. So I can, look at my data here. I know there's a way of doing this. If it's smaller, I can. But what I can do is, I've got my data. Let's see if I've got something that's tiny-ish. This is small. So you can see this is what my data looks like. I've got it sorted now. So now that I've got my data sorted, I could use this as and query off of it and use it in Power BI. Now, if the purpose of me putting my data together is just so that I can make reports off of it, once I've got it formatted how I need it, then all I need to do is go into Power BI, which I'm opening up here, and then connect to my data so that I can use it in my Power BI model. So I don't have to have a data warehouse. I don't have to have SQL. And I can take data from many different places. And if I wanted to, I could do my data transformations completely within Power BI. So let me kind of look at that. So within Power BI, I can get data. And if I want to get it from Azure, I can get it from Azure Blob Storage. And then I can open up a specific account name and then include that into my report, and then pull my data in. So I can have no restrictions on, I could do that ETL within the cloud, or I could do that within Power BI if I wanted to do that. So, hey, Luther, did you have a question? Are the curated files in a data lake, or are we still in blob storage? So in answer to your question, you are in blob storage in a curated folder. So all of this is just another folder in my data lake. So let's take a look at that. So this might be an easier way of looking at it. My data lake is the container that I'm in here. So this is a Azure Data Lake Gen 2 data lake. And within it, I've got a blob container. And within the blob container, starting at the root, I've got a number of different file folders where I have different data elements. So I've got the curated files here, and I've got my raw files here. So I've got a number of different places where I can put them. Generally speaking, in raw, this is where I have read-only data that I don't want anybody messing with. And once I have curated it, then I put the updated version into this curated section. And then I have the ability to access my data from into Power BI. So I've got flat files, I've brought them in there, and then I can use them into Power BI. Now, the beauty of having them within this Azure cloud is that anybody can access the data so that I've granted access to. So you don't have to worry about, whether or not somebody, you grant access to the different file folders to provide people access to it so that they can use it for doing reporting. All right. So, and again, once you've got it in here, hey, you can then use it to say, do Power BI. But I wanted to show you another way of doing it that I think you might find a little bit more, provide a little bit more value. Now, this is certainly something you can do from here. I don't have to do anything to do with it. I could take my raw data, and in the next session, we'll do some more walkthroughs on how I can just take my data from here and put it into Power BI. And we'll also take a look at the next step, which is going to be what I wanted to talk about next, which is creating I want to talk about what you can do. So why would you not want to just stop here and just basically do Power BI off of it? Well, you might. You might decide that this is what you want to do. You've got your files in the cloud. Everybody can access them. You can add security to ensure that the data is not being modified. You can add all sorts of different levels of security, and it's very inexpensive. And then you can connect in Power BI and use Power Query to do your different transformations on that data into Power BI. And it's an extremely low-cost solution. Storage in Azure in the blob storage area using an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 is very inexpensive. But little caveat there is it doesn't integrate really well with all tools. You do have to add the files one at a time. And it's like, for example, if you wanted to use paginated reports, the new SSRS, you're going to have some problems. it doesn't work that well as a data source. On the flip side, if you ever want to do data science, and it'd be a great place to implement that as well. And also it provides you with a place that you don't have to worry about ever going down in case of power outages, etc. And your data is very secure. So you might just decide that's all. I'm going to put all my data in Data Lake. I'm going to use Power BI to access it, write reports off of it. Let's show you more about that next session. There's your major tease. But what if you want to do something else? There's another option that I'd like to lay out for you because it provides additional value.
Well, and the question I had about the Power BI, Ginger, right, you'll forgive me, is that so while you have the different files, let's say I get one a month, right, or one a week, right? I have this frequency, right? If I'm using the Power BI model, don't I then have to go in and add that every time I'm changing that model every time? There's really no good way to be like, hey, I'm going to get a file and I want to add this into my reporting on a regular basis.
Well, you could write some. If you're pretty good at writing M code, you can do that. Okay, I wouldn't say you can't automate it, but it's a bit of work on the Power BI side that you would need.
And the number of people who want to write M code, raise your hands.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
You can do it, and you can automate it, and you can just do it all in Power BI. But yeah, it's kind of tricky. You need to be really good with creating different parameters and then generating different parameters based on other parameters to make that fly. But you can, and you wouldn't have to do anything else on it. Now, here's the other thing too, is if you say do your own file manipulation, again, this is just all about your budget, right? If you take the old file and put it someplace and rename it with a new file, then Power BI would work just fine. Just depends on how you have your data updated. And what level of automation that you want to engage. Because if you find that you would rather not spend a lot of resources and you just want to load things up yourself, you can, as long as they are small. Or you could start doing this as a proof of concept and then engage SQL Data Partners to create an automated solution that just grabs everything and updates everything. So, and if you do that, then you can use Power BI, and then you don't have to care because you're doing the data adds in an automated fashion. So you've got some different options with that. So the next thing that you would want to do maybe is create a virtual database. Now, this is really cool because you get the benefits of the database without paying for one. The minimum Azure SQL database that I would think would be an acceptable solution in a environment, just assuming you've got some data, would be 1,400. Because the real small ones, I mean, you barely have enough data if you're going with the smaller ones. So most of the time when I'm seeing people looking at what they want for an Azure SQL DB, you're talking about like 1,000 to 1,400 a month in your Azure SQL database costs when it comes to decently sized ones with data. Let's say you'd rather not spend that. Or let's say you might think, well, can I get away with things a little bit slower? If that is the case, you might want to look at creating a virtual database. You would create a virtual database on top of your flat files. Now, this does mean it's never going to be as fast as a database because we're just talking flat files here. But it is a really good solution that you could implement in your environment. So, and the virtual database is very similar to Azure SQL, uses T-SQL commands and some additional ones that make things helpful. And you can connect it as a SQL database. So that's kind of a neat thing because you don't have to look at each file. You can create a virtual database and then use that in your different reporting or querying tools. And also, if you want to do ad hoc query analysis, that's pretty cool as well. Well, to implement that kind of technology, I'm going to introduce a little bit more about Azure. And Azure is a application that Microsoft released in December of last year. And what it's designed to do is it's designed to provide very comprehensive solution for any way you might want to access your data. You want a data warehouse using a full-on, terabyte data warehouse, it's in there, but you don't have to turn it on. You want to just manipulate a bunch of flat files, awesome, that's in there too. You want to do all of the ETL within one tool, that's in there as well. So you've got different kinds of pools. And also to support data science, it also includes a Apache Spark pool that you can use for in-depth data analysis that integrates also with Azure ML if you want to incorporate that, so that you can write some pretty tricky ML in Synapse as well. The serverless pool, unlike the dedicated pools, is built in, which means that it's always on, but unlike the dedicated pool, you pay for it when you use it. So let's go ahead and open that up and take a look at that, at this tool. So within Azure Synapse, I have a number of, this is the home section, I have a number of different data elements in my environment. So I've got a default database, and I've also got several SQL databases as well. So these are all virtual databases with the exception of these here, the ones with the little houses. This shows you that it is a dedicated pool. So most of the time, mine are just not running. Now, the rest of these databases, these are not databases in the traditional sense. What these are is these are views of my flat files. So what I've done is I've basically, we looked at where these lived within my data here. These are here. I did EMR specifically. So I've got these flat files here, and I can make them into a database. So to do that, all I need to do is write some commands that access the data. And once I do that, I can take my flat files and query them as if they were a SQL table. So I can do this with an Excel file, with a CSV file. Now I will say for performance reasons, I would like to transform this to a parquet file because they do work the best. And I'll show you the really complicated code that allows me to do that. Careful, it's all of 2 lines here. So if I wanted to do that, this is what I would do to the code. I'd write this, these 2 lines of code, and then I would change the format to a parquet format so that it'll perform a little bit better, because that is a compressed data format that it handles easier. You can't read it. That's the only drawback of it. So I would probably format my code as parquet so that I would be able to run queries as fast as I wanted to. Now, once I've got this data connected or created here, I can use any database connection to be able to access the data in any tool that I want to. So if I want to use this in paginated reports, I just tell it my database connection, which is my dedicated, this is my dedicated endpoint here. So this is what I would use to connect to my database. If you're considering converting your on-prem data warehouse to parquet files in Azure, now one thing about that is it's a great idea, but I will say it will never be as fast as a SQL database, be that a data warehouse or a dedicated pool, because it's a flat file. Now, there are some things that you can do to make it go a lot faster, but I don't want to just make you think that you're going to get the kind of performance that you would get if you're paying $1,400 a month for this solution, which would probably run you closer to $100. So it's just not going to be the same performance-wise. But it does work. And let's say that I am using this as my database, and I have determined that given the ad hoc query uses of my users, that this is not fast enough for me. No problem. I can migrate this to a Azure SQL DB in a couple of hours using poly-based commands. So it's not like you've really lost anything. And I can also do stuff in SQL like create new tables that are smarter, do different joins, views, all sorts of stuff. All right. So that is the serverless pool, basically taking your files and making them into a database. Is this right for you? Well, it doesn't perform as well as SQL DB, but you can do some things to improve the performance, but it is so much cheaper because when you are using Azure Synapse serverless pools, what you only pay for queries, and your query costs are $5 for a terabyte. So not going to eat you out of house and home either. A very inexpensive solution. And again, if you find that you need to migrate it because it's just too slow for you, very easy to do. But it does provide a great way to create a whole bunch of databases, use them in your environment, maybe do a bunch of proof of concepts, and get this done very quickly, because all we're talking about is basically making flat files into tables. So great and really easy to do. All right. So things to remember. So we talked about a number of different things. There's no one solution. You can do different things in different environments, just all depending upon what your needs are. You can do a whole lot of cool things with flat files and not pay any money for it. And you can do the most amazing big time data warehousing with terabytes and terabytes of data. It just depends on what you're trying to do. But you can also do things like of your data source. So there's lots of different features, and this accommodates a lots of different levels of Azure spend as well. So questions about anything that I have presented? Wanted to definitely provide some time to talk more about the technology and also kind of prep some of the upcoming things that we will be doing, because we've got 2 more sessions where the next one we're going to get into more of the technical how-tos and to how to create, how you can upload files, how you can convert them, how you can make all this automatic so it just all happens, and then have your Power BI files just work. So with that, we're going to kind of open it up for any questions.
Right, and I think part of what I would like to ask is, so let's clear the right word, right? So does it make sense to you? Because part of what we wanted to show was I can go from Excel files to a logical and be able to query off of that and do all the things that I'm normally used to doing with databases.
Definitely.
Are there any questions particularly about that? I know Ginger talked about several other pieces there, right? There's lots of different ways to skin the cat. But any questions particularly in that vein?
Yeah, in the next session, which we're going to get into the technical, we'll do a walkthrough, and we'll start with an Excel file, show you how all that happens, rather than just show you the little pieces, parts. We'll put it all together.
Sure. You apparently have mesmerized them, Ginger. Everyone is
yeah, well, too many people
overcome.
Coming back from lunch and just gone into food coma.
Okay, well, very good. Well,
I got another question here from Justin. How would you be able to link Service Azure Data Synapse for flat files to a fully built out Azure Data Warehouse? Well, those are 2 different things. So one of them is a bunch of flat files that I'm using for a database. What I would probably do if I wanted to create a full out Azure data warehouse is take the flat files and load them to my dedicated pool as tables. So I would, once I've got the data formatted how I want, I would then load it to my data warehouse using Polybase. So I wouldn't technically be using the serverless database components when I'm doing that. I would just do a file transfer. I can't remember. Is a Synapse serverless pool support auto scaling to meet demand? Yes, it does auto scale. There's no real controls for it. It doesn't allow you to scale something, make a bigger one or make a smaller one, in answer to your question. It also depends a lot on.
That would be the big drawback, right? To this, is that your costs are lower, right? It's I don't know if simpler is the right word, but
yeah,
can be much more straight approachable. But you are then going to take a hit, in terms of performance.
Sure, it will never be. There isn't any file-based solution that will ever be as fast as a dedicated tool designed to give you data back quickly. It'll be good, but it will never be that good. So just keep those expectations in mind. And if you go through this process and you're like, I don't want to do this, I just want to load everything up into an Azure SQL DB, it's very easy to move it. Very easy. So
sure. I mean, one of the interesting pieces that made me think about it is that, for at least from a user perspective, is that you can have a lot of those questions in the environment that the users feel comfortable in,
right,
in the Excel piece, right? And as you go through I want to call it data cleansing process, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to figure out what pieces are and make sure that everything, lines up. You're removing some of the complexity because they don't have to then use other tools. They can use Excel to do that. And then in theory, it will make your life easier when you go to the next stage.
Right. It just depends also on what you're trying to do. For example, if my goal is to have a place that I can connect to my data with Power BI, and I want to do my ETL in Power BI, I can do that by just using the data lake. I don't need the virtual database on top of flat files for that.
Sure.
So as a matter of fact, I can get away with just well-formatted flat files if I wanted to do that in Power BI too. So it just depends on what your end goal for the data is, and who all needs to be accessing it.
I see Rob Wagner on here, and unfortunately he knows me. And so I'm going to ask a question for him on his behalf that he's not asking, because I know that Rob's got some crazy Excel. Well, how do I say crazy? Meaning that there could be some weird headers, right? So it may not always be consistent. So there could be, right? I don't get consistency until line 15 or 16, right? If you will, right? But those first, the top area could be kind of run the gamut in terms of working with what I'm going to call complicated Excel, right? Thoughts around that?
Again, if I'm trying to parse data out of complicated Excel, I would probably do that in Power BI.
Oh, there you go.
I could do it in.
Even if you got 1,000 Excel files?
Are they formatted the same way?
I think it's a little more consistent when you get to line 14, right? But the lines 1 through 14 might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, because it depends. I mean, if I can just get away with truncating prior to line 14, that would be one thing. But it just depends on what I have to do. And Power BI's Power Query tool allows me a lot of flexibility for doing that. Rob, you said you're able to make SSIS ingest them. Did you have to do anything to them?
Oh.
The other thing too is that there is depending upon, again, just depending on where you want to do it, but I could also do it within my integration tool, because I've got the ability to read Excel files and then do some manipulation on them in there to be able to get them into a straight up format so that I could use them in a database like that manner.
Yeah.
So you're able to do that with SSIS, huh? Well, cool.
There you go.
It depends on how tricky it is. If you want to do it in Power BI or if you want to do it in the functional equivalent of Azure Data Factory, which is the integration portion of Synapse. Some of the tables are pivoted, and some of the tables are not always showing the same location in each file. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah, that's a challenge, that's for sure. Okay, well, very good. Well, Ginger, thanks so much. So with that, thanks everybody again for being here, and we'll talk to you later.
You've been told that passing through Databricks can improve the retrieval times. So if you're using Databricks, then there are ways of doing it, but it's still not going to be as good as a data warehouse. Because if you're using Databricks, you might you're getting into something that I haven't talked about here that you can do with Azure Synapse as well, and implement a data format called a Delta Lake. And Delta Lakes will offer an even more improved performance. But you don't have to use Databricks, because the features and functionalities that it includes are also included within Synapse, and it also includes some things that Databricks doesn't do. And that goes both ways. But another thing that I haven't really talked about at all is all of the integration that you might use with Azure Data Factory is included in Synapse in the pipeline section. So this incorporates all of my data warehousing components, and that's all within one environment as well. I can also use my notebooks here to write a lot of machine learning, which we'll get into in our last session, to do some further analysis of the data. So this is definitely a solution that I think that you might find really helpful. Again, all these are is we can just compare them to my data here. So I've got data that I've got listed here, and I've made that into a database right here. So can do a lot of different fun stuff with that and create a logical data warehouse on that. Yeah, there's a lot out there, so I can see why you might be confused, and a whole bunch of ways that you could possibly do it. And I will say that Databricks and Synapse are compatible in a lot of ways, and both of them do a lot of similar things, but this virtual warehouse on top of your data isn't implemented really the same way. I wouldn't think I don't say that how Databricks does it is really compatible. This is a lot easier and a lot more functional than what you do in Databricks. And when you're doing it in Databricks, you do have to have a pretty good knowledge of R, Python, or Scala to be able to make it fly. So it all depends on the skill sets of people in your environment. If you've got a number of people that are really familiar with SQL, have some familiarity with maybe SSIS, because the pipelines that are similar to that and how that they function, then that you won't find this to be such a big leap. I find for a lot of people who look at Databricks, they're like, oh, now we have to be Scala developers. And that may or may not be something your organization is willing to do.
SQL Data Partners.